Excellent.
everyone. Welcome everyone to our second We Have a Cave Troll stream. I'll just have to remember all of this for when we do this again in the future.
That's right. Save the settings, man. Save the settings.
Save in those settings. Turn down the volume a little bit. All right. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by scenario on the message boards, and this is
Allan Maki, and I go by Orion on the message boards, forums, and everywhere else you see me.
And we're here today to continue our series of just hanging out, chatting, a little bit of Q&A, and giving some sneak previews and behind the scenes stuff about what we're working on, what we've worked on in the past, and answering any questions that you guys might have that are at least within our purview to answer.
Now, I'm going to start today off, Matt, by asking you a question.
All right.
How do we make our damn expansions? How do we do this?
We have a
what's
make
our process?
Expansion button. We just have a make expansion button, and we push that, and then we make an expansion.
Is that what happens? That's how we do it all the time.
I mean that's what a lot of people think happens, but that's not usually the case.
No, I can definitely tell you that that's not the case. No, I mean we started back when, wow, a long time ago on this one, and I mean it starts with first going to Pearson, right, and saying, hey, we need some background on where we're going. Especially now that we're outside of the exact boundaries of the books at this point, so we need a lot of that extra insight, extra sauce on where we're going to be moving from one place to another. So, I mean that's usually where we start. Sometimes it's a nugget of an idea. Sometimes it's just hey, we want to do this. Or in the case of, I think for the legacy of Morgoth, we're really kind of looking to two folks, right, to start us off. And the first one was probably Mid-Alliance, and the second one is Pearson to give us the insight into what the new region, because we're not really calling it a full region because it's really the start of the push into Harad, right? It's really closer to near Harad than it is the full expansiveness of Harad.
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest like challenges and exciting things for us too is whenever we go into something like this, something that's new, we kind of have to dig around a little bit to find out who our antagonist is going to be. And a lot of that discussion and conversation sort of informs what we then do for the rest of our expansion pack and even beyond the expansion pack. Like a few years ago, we had pitched, I think, 4 or 5 different campaigns, like 4 or 5 different ways we could have taken the story, and then had those conversations internally about like what made sense to go in what directions. And the stuff we did with the Shield Isles and Umbar was really kind of building towards what we want to do with Legacy of Morgoth. We don't often generate an expansion pack as a one-off, one-and-done story. I think the last time we did that was Before the Shadow, which was really meant to be a new player experience. But most every single other expansion pack we do builds off of the story leading up to it. So you get a year's worth of plot that then leads into an expansion pack that then continues and then leads into an expansion pack.
Yeah, and I think one of the coolest parts of the Legacy of Morgoth expansion is that we're moving into an area that is different, right? We haven't had a lot of the landscape and the appearances that we're about to start showing off in the next few weeks with the entirety of the Ikrabon Valley. Wow, I don't know where that came from. So we're gonna start showing. That's got to be what it was, right? The technical difficulties. Suddenly became a Valley girl. I'm very excited about where we're going, and I think the important thing to note for players is that this is probably going to take us into the next expansion that would come out beyond the Legacy of Morgoth, and what we're going to be looking at is the plight of the people in this land.
Mm-hmm.
and then your inclusion as an outsider. So it's an interesting way to look at things, and I think it's going to be a very fun experience. But I mean, we're talking about kind of the setup, right? So the setup is coming up with the story beats and coming up with the ideas that are going into this, and we are continuing on with the story of the Song of Waves and Wind, and we're also kind of taking a return to the methods that we kind of did in the far distant past, where each of the zones that we're creating will have stories that are inherent to them, so that there are
Mm-hmm.
bits to follow there. And then what we're trying to do is kind of I don't want to say get in the Wayback Machine because I think that's the wrong way to look at it, but we're leaning a little bit on the nostalgia aspect of what the game was at the launch and trying to make some of a return to that, while embracing some of the more modern techniques that other games are doing. I mean, I know that we're both pretty proud of what we do here, and I know we both love what we do here. So it's been very interesting to work on this expansion overall.
I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about us getting back to with Legacy of Morgoth is something that we really actually spent a lot of time with the initial launch of the game making sure that the storylines told by the epic story and the storylines told by just general region content kind of crossed paths with each other and intersected and helped each story being told in there become richer because of it. You know, I think one of the fun things about how exciting players have been about Angmar and Mordor, the new legendary servers, is it's brought a lot of people who don't have kind of this super deep history with Lord of the Rings into playing. And it's been interesting watching their streams and watching their YouTube videos and seeing how like they're making commentary about this quest line in the epic story and then be like, "Oh, well there's this guy that I don't know anything about. What's the deal with this guy?" But if they had played like Bree, played through the Bree content instead of the Eric Lewin content, they'd have that kind of richer context for things. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that with looking, you know, we over the years kind of fell off of with our expansion packs and our content updates, where there wasn't as much interaction between the epic storyline or the main storyline and the region quests, and getting back to that I think is another, you know, it's just a great thing for us to help all of the content we're producing feel more relevant and more important to the regions itself.
Yeah, that's really kind of the impetus behind it is to go back and make those areas feel lived in and an experience unto themselves. So I'm pretty excited about where we're going with that. Um, Biomes, man, like not to toot your horn or the world team's horn here, but holy crap, some of the areas that you've put together for this expansion are gorgeous, and I know that you're going to start showing them off in the next few weeks.
Yep.
But it's important to note, right, that the game engine is over 20 years old, and what we're still able to do with it and what you're able to accomplish with it is stunning to me, and it's a testament to like how good you guys are at what you do, and just it's just beautiful from everything that I've seen so far.
No
And
amount of headache from our engineers being like, "You're doing too much of this. You're doing too much of this."
oh
So
yeah,
we,
yeah, no,
you know,
I mean,
I think
so
with that, we're like, I think the difference too now, you know, when we launched the game and through the first couple of expansion packs, we were very concerned with graphics performance, making sure that, you know, oh hey, on this system spec, we need to be able to hit this many frames per second, and you know, we kind of always just built in that way. And now we're thinking in terms of like, okay, we know how to like do the graphics side of things, but how are we building our regions to better support server performance, and to, you know, what tricks and whatnot can we do to help with that, because we never really had the tools to be able to look into those sorts of things. And now some of our engineering team has been really giving us the tools that we need and the information we need to be able to be like, okay, this has been pushed too far. Let's pull that back. This is not performant. What can we do to change these things, at least from the server perspective?
Yeah,
And while the 64-bit servers are not the like fix for everything, they also do help a lot too. And we're getting a lot of great information from those servers to help us think about how we build things and also think about what about the other worlds, those sorts of things.
yeah. I mean, I know that I know that players are happily consuming everything on the Mordor and Angmar servers and experiencing the game, with a lot less latency than they typically have. But like the long and short of like what has gone on there is that it's not as simple as just upgrading to the 64-bit servers. There's been a lot of work going on in the background. We have biweekly meetings now where we talk about performance, and there's a few people in the chat have brought up Minas Tirith, and one of the things that we've been looking at is specifically the performance in Minas Tirith, and finding that just a lot of the assets that are there are, some of them are not behaving the way that they're supposed to, and others are just constructed in ways that they feel like they should not have been constructed. And it's a process now to go back through and adjust those items and adjust those entities to make sure that they become the performant way that they're supposed to, so that loading into the space is easier. Loading any of the objects inside of the city itself are faster and not as consuming of resources from video cards and whatnot. But I know you and I were both there at the outset when we Matt and I fought, I think, together in the trenches on the fact that we were going with a more hyper realistic look for the year 2007, and it was putting us into a box where we knew that the reach of the game was going to be fairly limited because of
Mm-hmm.
the minimum spec that we were going to have on the game, because we were going so hyper realistic and we were pushing so much of the boundaries of what you could actually get for vert counts and for shaders and everything else back in 2007. So to see that the game has outlived all of those concerns at this point, and now we have brand new concerns that are also graphics related, but they're in a different manner because they were just the practices that we started off with have become more lax over time, but at the same time we haven't made some of the adjustments on the back end that we probably should have along the way, and we're working on getting back to that. I mean, it's weird to think that the longevity of the game has like made a lot of the decisions in the past not as egregious, but at the same time have brought about a whole bunch of new issues and problems that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about like being in the trenches at the start of things, why don't we talk a little bit about our first expansion pack, uh, the
Moria?
the the place that we never thought we would ever get to, in Moria. Um, do you remember how the original pitch for the Moria expansion pack actually started?
Was it all instances? I can't remember anymore.
So the original pitch for Moria was we knew we wanted to do an expansion pack, but there were a few people at the exec level that weren't quite sure we wanted to do Moria as the first expansion pack. And
That's
so they really needed us to have multiple pitches for what we were going to do. And we on the development team, like all of us, the developers, designers, artists, we were all like Moria or bust. This is what we're doing. But exec was like, no, we need to hear other options. So we gave one of our designers the unenviable position of creating a real stinker of a pitch. Like, make it the least, like, we say, okay, they want us to bring two pitches to the table. So, sorry, bud, you're the one that gets to do the Dunland pitch
Oh,
versus
that's
Moria.
right.
So we put up Moria versus Dunland as our first expansion pack, intentionally with um, with the Dunland pitch being the least attractive possible expansion pack pitch. And hey, it worked. We got Moria for our first
Go
expansion
figure.
pack.
Go figure, right? Yeah. I mean, there was a lot going on during that time, right? I mean, the whole idea of housing, the original version of LI, there was a lot of stuff going on with Monster Play at the time and the instances, and man, Moria was that was a haul. That was like that felt like years. I remember when we got the Clobber Day. Clobber, for those not on the know, is when you basically take all of the work that you've done and obliterate all the other stuff that existed before to put the new stuff into the game. It's a very trying day because if things go wrong, you can lose lots and lots of data that might become unrecoverable. Uh, Unfortunately, we never really hit those. Knocking on wood now.
Well,
But yeah, that was
and
it was just such a long haul to get there.
well, it felt like a long haul, but if you look at the actual timeline of things,
Oh, it was only like 8 months.
it really wasn't. But I
Mm.
think one of the things that was like the biggest headache for all of us was because this was our first expansion pack. We'd never built something like this in this engine before. We were really worried about having to maintain multiple trees of data.
Yeah.
So we had like all of the excuse me. We had all of the stuff we were working on for the expansion packs in their own like distinct directories so that we could work in a branch without needing to worry about everything in area door.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, the clobber day came, and it's just like, okay, we're gonna smash them all together.
Back
Here's
together.
hoping nothing
See what
breaks.
happens. Hope it's not going to create a black hole like a large hadron collider. No, we
Ah,
that was a very scary week. I remember that. There, I mean, and now you look at it and it's like, oh, expansion coming, Clobber Day, old hat, right?
well, I
I
think
think
we have a different approach
we're
to
the
how we handle
process.
our data now
Yeah.
too. Like we're not as scared of merging, and I think we
No.
are all familiar enough with how our data works that we know how to work in a way that can keep what we're building kind of separate from what already exists without being problematic. And part of like our experience with Moria helped inform all of that as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you and I both come from live services too, right? We
Yeah,
were both working on Asheron's Call before we got
live
onto Elotra.
live services before everyone else wanted live services.
It's so true. So we had already been like in the trenches on live services the whole time, and I think part of what made Moria so different is that we did take a pause for a period of time before Moria went out in our live services to make sure that we could get the expansion out the way that we wanted to. So that was a complete departure from what we had been doing too. So I mean, there were a lot of odd firsts that came along with Moria, I think, and you know, there's a couple of questions. Wasn't that the same around the same time that the warden and the roomkeeper came in? And the answer is yes, right? Those There was a lot that went into Moria. Moria was just a massive undertaking. When you
It
look back on it now, it was you know it was a feat to get to where we did.
it was very
Um,
systemically ambitious between the class additions, the legendary item system, the introduction of the dual hype map system, the introduction of Region 2 to our data. Like there was a lot of stuff. And again, at least speaking in terms of the region stuff, like that's easy peasy to do. Like if we decide, next year we need another region, like our world team can just be like, "Boop, we know how to do that, super easy." Um, Not to say that like classes and legendary item systems are easy, but at least as far as like creating a new region, like we've got that figured out. But that was something we'd never done before, and we weren't even sure if we could do that. So we were kind of like, hope we can do this, or it's gonna be mighty cozy in Moria.
yep, and look, I mean, we've had hits and misses along the way, right? Snorlax just called out Radiance. Yeah, Radiance was part of the Moria release, and Radiance was a swing and a miss. Uh, I remember when we sat down. God, it had to be. Oh, you must remember that. That's the first time that they tried to push us into agile development.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where they were like, okay, so we need to talk about all this stuff, and part of that was it was an interesting discussion because by the end of it, we had thrown the whole idea of agile out the window because we ended up talking about how terrible Radiance ended up being for the players and how it was not doing what we had expected it to do. And I remember at that point saying, well, who's going to be the messenger? And nobody wanted to go out there and be the one to say, hey, we screwed up. And I was like, come on, like we're going to make mistakes. We're humans. It's okay to admit faults sometimes, which is where I was like, all right, fine, I'll be the one, right? Because it doesn't matter. It mattered obviously at the time. It was pretty terrible the reception that it ended up getting, as we didn't really fix and tweak what we probably should have along the way. But somebody needed to step up and do that. And I just remember that was one of the first times that I was like, yeah, I'm never gonna be afraid to admit when I did something wrong. So that was always interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like too with expansion packs, those are opportunities to try things, right? Like you wanna try something new. Expansion packs are an opportunity to do that, and you know sometimes, like you said, you miss.
Yeah,
I think the legendary item system did really well for us at the time, and it's changed over time, and now it's very different now. But
very.
I feel like that's kind of the gem of that update. I know, and the instances too, which you worked a lot on yourself as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think my second favorite instances was in that release that I built. The first one still being Bard Gularan. I love Bard Gularan. That was so much fun to build. Um, no, it's weird, right? I mean, you mentioned ambition, and I think one of the things that we don't lack as a small company is ambition, and sometimes our ambition far exceeds our ability, but that doesn't mean that we won't continue to strive to hit all the goals that we put before ourselves and try to meet and exceed all of them. Um, so we might as well talk a little bit about some of our ambitions for this expansion. And um, is there anything that you can think of off the top of your head that you're really kind of striving for that you think you're going to get or that you're looking to get?
So I think we each group, each department on the team kind of has different things that they're working towards, and different goals and objectives. And I think for World, ever since I've kind of come back and been playing a little bit more with building these broader landscapes, starting with things like Swanfleet and Cardolan and whatnot. I think my bigger ambition and goal for the four regions that we're introducing in the Valley of Ikerbon is explorability. When we were talking about the development of Legacy of Morgoth, and then comparing it to previous regions, one of the bits of feedback that we had gotten from our designers is like, world builds too big. We can't fill everything that they're building with all of the content. And I think for us, we we really wanted to try to take an approach of like core gameplay region or core gameplay landscape versus explorable landscape, to kind of help alleviate the concerns from our content design team about having to fill every single square land block that we make with content. Um, so I think that's something that we're exploring with a little bit, and hopefully we hit pretty well. Is taking these big broad landscapes, having kind of focused content areas in them, but then also having enough space for players to just meander, to explore, to not feel like they're like tripping over quest objects every 15 feet, because I think one of the things that was really appealing about Swanfleet and Cardolan was the explorability of it, was the traversability of it, of you being able to just kind of wander around and stumble across these little things that didn't necessarily have to have content associated with them, and that gave you as a player the opportunity to kind of make up your own story as you're running through there. There's always this concept in storytelling and in media about like how much information is too much information, and does something lose its specialness when you explain it too much. So sometimes having a landmark behind every ruin out there and a quest going into everything can sometimes um, prevent the player from coming up with their own stories and their own headcanon for what a space is. It limits or reduces imagination a little bit. And I think hopefully with these kind of more open areas where players can go out and explore these nooks and crannies that don't necessarily have content, it gives them the opportunity to imagine themselves in that world and imagine their own stories in those spaces without having a narrative to kind of carry them through it.
Mm, yeah. I mean, it's I think part of the big ambitions that the content and systems team are going for here are certainly on the content side, right? Is giving the life to a region and zones that we don't that nobody really knows much about, right? Providing those enemies that make sense to the space and to provide an understandable story arc for not only those who are really interested in the epic story that Made of Lions is consistently writing, but also the story narrative, the narratives that are around the people of the land, how they interact with one another, the plight that they're dealing with, and then what the player's role is inside of that. I think I think you hit one of the nails of what makes Lord of the Rings Online the game that it is, and that's the world is really a character unto itself, right? I mean the fact that you're in Middle Earth and you're living there, like you're living inside of the character, and I think that's the one thing that we've been very consistent on over the years is making sure that you feel like you're there, and I know that we've maintained that through this expansion, and one of the things that I know I had said when we sat down to talk about what we were going to do during this show was I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the pieces that we're working on and aspects of that might make sense. And one of those is there are some quality of life things that we want to look at for the players overall. And I can say very plainly that the immediate release after the expansion, we're looking to do a lot of quality of life updates and a lot of positive changes that we've kind of backburnered for a while to make sure that we increase and enhance the way that the game can be enjoyed by everyone as we continue to move forward into our 19th year, since we're in our 18th now. But I think one of those that's coming with the expansion is the first step of starting to help declutter some of players' inventory with the new with one of the new things that we're working on right now, right? With a new collections panel that enables you to take items that are fun, interesting, um, uh, kind of just social in the way that they're used, like fireworks, like not like pets because pets are their own thing, but the fireworks, the face paints, the costumes, things of that nature, and putting them into a new collections panel, which we're calling baubles. We've made a couple of brand new baubles for the expansion. Now, I think they're going to be pretty cool. That you'll be able uh, to do more with the role playing aspect of things with this particular new feature that we're adding. It's you know it's a it's not a truly novel idea, but it's kind of novel to the game, and it's a good way for us to take some of those long-standing items and turn them into something that's a little more functional for the player, and get them out of the inventory to remove some of the spaces that are just taken by rather arbitrary items, right? Like all the fireworks that you get over the years, if you can now just have those as a skill bit, uh, a skill type of bit, it makes things a little easier. And part of why we're looking at this in that manner is so we can start doing more fun things along those lines.
Well, and I
So I'm
think
pretty excited about
that kind of system too dovetails a lot into some of the performance stuff that we've been talking about too, where it helps make your characters a little bit lighter on the server, which is going to make the server in general just happier when there's a ton of, 15-year-old characters with heavy inventories, heavy quest logs, like all of that stuff. Moving things like bauble items into a more of a system than an inventory just helps. And I think that's something where we're putting a lot of thought and effort into now, is like, how can we make these kinds of quality of life improvements that just help.
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of the thing, and there's a bunch of questions coming in now, right? They're just on things like virtue and things like uh, upgrades and whatnot. Um, we're working on the virtue thing. Um, we've got we've got some ideas, and a lot of that is stuff that we're going to be looking at for 2025. There's this expansion right now is pretty much the only thing we're really focused on at this point. Though we do have, at least from a skeletal structure, the entirety of 2025 and most of 2026, and I pretty much have an idea of where we're going all the way through the 20th anniversary. Personally, I still got to get buy-in from the rest of the team and from Matt and everybody else. But there are changes that are coming, and we're looking to find better ways and more consistent ways to fit in with the story of the game, the fun of the game, the world at large, right? And make sure that they all have a space and a place that belongs inside of the world. And the idea and notion of the collections panel is something that when we decided to do birding as the next hobby, uh, we wanted to lean into the collections panel for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very easy way for us to maintain that, and it's as Matt, you were just saying, it's a much cheaper way to handle it, because there are it's a lot easier to use what we're doing there from a technical standpoint than to have the items in your inventory and to have them carried around with you everywhere you go. So moving, like you said, moving the baubles out of inventory is going to be a much better way to handle that moving forward. I mean, other minor things that we're looking at right now are, how can we assist players who are playing multiple characters through the expansion? Reputation grinds are just that, right? They're grinds, and while maybe playing through the first time is fun and interesting, it's not necessarily something you want to keep doing over and over again. So we're looking at ways that we can alleviate some of that, or to help with alts who are doing things like that, and that will help us build upon that to get to the solutions that are necessary for future updates for like virtue and whatever else we might want to address that way. So I mean, there's a lot of things that we're looking at. I just saw a question about Ettenmore's gear, right? Being able to put the gear that you have to wear in the Ettenmore's into a special slot rather than having to swap in and out all the time. These are all things that are on a big old whiteboard that we've got, that we look around and say, hey, we really, really want them to do that.
Virtual whiteboard, because we're all remote.
We're all remote. But there is a giant list of things that we want to do someday. With a much larger team, it'd be possible, right? But we have to pick and choose and be careful about the things that we're actually adjusting. Someone actually just said it'd be great if you could call them madams. We thought about that. We really did. We started with madams. We went to doodads. We went to baubles. We went to toys. We went through a whole gamut of things that we could potentially call them, and we kind of landed on baubles because it made sense, because they're just little things that you can do. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and Madam was one of the thing. It was one of the objects that was there, but it's a very, very specific word to hobbits. So we decided that wasn't the best choice to go with there.
So speaking of picking and choosing, how does the systems team pick and choose what kind of features go into an expansion pack? Like what kind of feature is like expansion pack worthy versus a normal update worthy?
I mean, there's a dartboard, and we seed it with a whole bunch of different pictures, and we just kind of that's not how it's done. So how do you couch this the right way? Um, there are a limitless number of ideas that are constantly floating around inside of my head of things that we can add to the game or that we want to add to the game. A lot of it comes down to necessity and desire, right? Um, necessity, unfortunately, trumps desire almost every single time that we come around to it. So anytime that we're looking at, say, let's use classes as an example. I think that's a really good place to go. Classes right now there's definitely an imbalance between some of our top tier DPS. Like the top DPS right now really should be champ and hunter, and because of the changes that have happened over the course of the past couple of years, we're looking at those two classes falling a little bit behind. Burglars are also still a stitch behind where they probably should be. With the addition of the addition of a class was something that we looked at and said, well, it probably is about time for another class, or maybe it's time for another race, or what is it that players are asking for the most, or what is it that there's a lot of desire for. So with classes right now, when we look at things, hunter, champion, burglar are the two that kind of need the most help on the player side. On the monster player side, we won't even talk about that. There's a lot that needs to be done with the monster player side, and we are looking at it. It's something that Anna and I are currently looking into and figuring out how we can do it. And the changes that we want to make out there are a little bit larger than would fit inside of what we have for time now. But a lot of that is just based off of the necessity versus the desire, and then the time that you have to do the things, and those folks that actually can work on them. So it's one of those things that we always look at and say, we have to do things in a way that fits within the scope, fits within the time frame, and fits within the resources that are available to us. It's that. That was a long-winded answer, I think.
And me, I'm just futzing around with our camera position in here a little bit.
You just want to show off. I know what you're doing.
I do want to. I can't wait to show off all of this beautiful landscape.
I know you can, and you should. Like you should want to. So let's see if there's anything in chat that we want to look at here.
And I've seen a few questions here or there. There's a lot to scroll through. A lot of it is commentary, which we probably won't comment on commentary.
Yeah, probably not.
But let's see. Go all the way back up to the top and see what I can see.
I saw someone asking about Bjornings and whether or not they're ever going to get an avatar update. So that is a difficult question because of the manner in which Bjornings were initially built. There is a desire to do that. The more that I get involved with the creation of the specific new tools and other skins and whatever else we've actually put in that are just cosmetically related, the closer and closer we're going to get to being able to update that. So it's still going to be some time because it's not at the top of our list, but being able to move some of the different existing bear skins to Bjornings is not outside of the realm of possibility. It's just way down on the whiteboard. Way down on the whiteboard.
So there's a question way, way, way up that something that you can probably have. I think I know the answer for this, but you are probably better to answer it than me. Is from Fred Skywalker. Why are there crafting items that don't go into your bag? Like infused adamants and malleable essences and whatnot.
Yeah, so everything in the game is built off of having specific values set on them somewhere in the game structure. And at different points in time, some items were created that do not have said item structure or item bit on them that would enable them to go into different bags. Those just happen to be some of the pieces that don't get to go into those spots because when they were created incorrectly and they don't have the right pieces, which means that they are a quality of life thing that we would have to look at. Now, the problem with some of these things is that they have been built and extrapolated over time and turned into things that they are not meant to be, and as a result, they would no longer fit into the categories that they should. So let's just say, for an example, the adamants were set up to initially be a quest item because you got them via a quest. That means that they would never go into the craft carryalls because they are technically a quest item. So they may get sorted into your quest carryall. But they might be set up with a different qualifier on them that precludes them or does not enable them to go into the craft carryall. So there's a lot of there's a lot of items in the game that are now considered one-offs that we would have to go through one by one to figure out what the solution is on them. And that is a much more daunting task than you would think it is.
And my interpretation of that question too suggested like why can't things like your copper ore and whatnot go into your wallet instead? And from my perspective anyways, like once something goes into your wallet, it becomes much harder to get it out of your wallet when it comes to player economy, for example. So if something goes into your wallet, it effectively can't be something that goes onto like the auction hall for players. It makes it much harder for it to become tradable, and you have to have, it's kind of like how we have the money bags that you can buy at the banker in order to like get access to it. So like
Mm-hmm.
there's that like balance of like, do we want inventory convenience for an individual player, or do we want to have this thing be something that it can be more easily tradable amongst players to help the crafting process? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
good. That's an appropriate
No,
explanation.
it is, and they just brought up again that the infused adamants aren't crafting items. It's not it's not. I'm using that as an example, right? It's if an item was created as X, it can never be put into a bag that is required for Y, right? So everything has to match in order for it to work correctly.
We've got another question from Eros216 that says, would you say that Moria has proven to be the most challenging expansion you've worked on? And we could probably extend that to, like, what has been the most challenging thing to work on any of the expansion packs we've worked on?
Not Moria, not Moria, not for me at least.
I think Moria was the probably the most physically challenging landscape to work on, at least from the world perspective, because normally we had to build basically two regions worth of height map. We had to build the floor and the ceiling, and that does take a lot
Mhm.
of work. Like any region that has a floor height map and a ceiling height map is more work, just in general. But I would honestly say that building Rohan was more of a technical challenge, at least from the world perspective, than it was for um, than Moria was, because Rohan, we had to do so much more when it came to making sure that the landscape was built in a certain way in order to support warbands and to support mounted combat, and we had a lot more that would need to be loaded and had to have systems in place to determine what needed to be loaded and what needed to not be loaded. So, like, I would say Moria was physically challenging, but Rohan was much more technically challenging for us from the world perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say Rohan too for completely different reasons. Uh, I mean, you and I were both working on the special project during that time, right?
Hmm. We always have
And
special projects.
yeah, but that one was super special, and I think that was the hardest because it was kind of the first time that something that seemed like we were getting a lot of really overwhelming positivity for it got pulled out from underneath our feet,
Yeah.
and that was just such a dagger, right? It was such a dagger to the heart, and at the same time, like when we got back over to focusing on mounted combat, there was just a lot that needed to be picked up and run with. So there was really no
Yeah.
time to mourn the dead kind of thing. And that was probably the most draining on me, is because there was something that I thought we were going to really knock out of the park. And I'm really sorry for sports metaphors. I just have a lot of them. But we ended up having to back off of that and then focus on getting the rest of the mounted combat stuff out.
It's always really challenging to have to drop into a system that because again, like we're talking about agile a little bit before, during that time at Turbine, anyways, there was a very heavy emphasis on project management, and that also meant
Mm.
that teams were very heavily siloed. So while we were
Oh
working
yeah.
on that special project, we had very little awareness or knowledge of what was going on with the Rohan expansion pack. Um, like I was involved at least in terms of building landscapes, but in general was kind of like kept away from any of the other like discussions. And I'm sure it was very similar with you. It's in like, okay, we're done with this now. You've just had 6 months of time. Now that thing you worked on is gone. Here's this thing you're working on now, and decisions have already been made for it. So you kind of have to work with what you got. That's
Yeah, I just
always that's never fun.
no, no, it wasn't. And I think the reason that it was even more difficult was because when we got back, we saw how much strain had been put on the team, and I mean at that time we were small.
Yeah,
We weren't very big at all, and because we had split the team mostly across, like almost all the systems designers went over to that other project, and
yeah,
I was the only hybrid that was over there at the time, being the only one that did both content and systems. That it was a really truly content heavy release, and I think it was only one major systems designer that was left on the team. Oh, it was two. It was two, and and they both were just completely overwhelmed to the point where I remember getting back over there and saying, "So where are the class updates for Mounted Combat?" And the answer was, "I haven't gotten around to doing them yet." And I just remember being like, "Oh God, like, but that's pretty rough." So we had to like really scramble and get that done, and I think that's what was so difficult about that expansion release, is because it was a pain point to come in so late in the process with so many of the decisions being made, and then sitting there and saying, huh, I don't know why this decision was made. And I remember talking to a lot of the engineers during that time and just being like, oof, there was just a lot of stuff that was going on there, and it was a difficult release. And someone asked what it was we were working on. We were working on an ill-fated uh, PvP version of things that were supposed to set us up to move into different markets. Um, that kind of focused on using Galadriel's mirror to do a bunch of what-if scenarios. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was very Smite-like.
I mean, I think anyone that works in game development does have experiences where they work on things that they're excited about only to have it kind of disappear. Like there I think were at least three Locha related special projects that I've worked on so
Oh
far
yeah,
that
yeah,
have
of course.
been like, oh nope, never mind, we're pivoting, we're changing direction. Um, so so yeah, it's always like sad when that happens, and then you kind of like move on to the next thing, which could be in progress already. So you always have to like just kind of be like, all right, gonna briefly mourn the thing that I'm no longer working on that I was feeling good about, and now like dive back into it, start working on the next thing.
Yeah, it was also the first time that I got memed too, which was funny. Because it was that silly shot of me with the ring just over my head at the right angle. Man.
And
Yeah, I mean,
the maps of the stuff that I had built are like out there in the world. So
oh, I know. Yeah. I think somebody had a video posted at one point too. But yeah, it's that was probably the hardest one. That was probably the
um,
hardest one.
So we have not worked on all of the expansion packs for Lord of the Rings. So we've worked on most of them. Both of us, we kind of had the same, very similar stint of time where we weren't working on Lotro. So there were a few expansion packs that came out um,
Rohan
outside
was my
of
last.
Hmm.
Rohan was my last until
Yeah.
Before the Shadow.
Yeah. I think Rohan. I did. I worked on Rohan very briefly. Worked on Rohan 2 before moving off to work on Infinite Crisis.
Yep,
Well,
same.
the
Well,
predecessor, the first thing, and then Infinite Crisis, another ill-fated project that we can't talk about. Um, so it's interesting seeing the growth of the game, and honestly, like for a while there were no expansion packs for Lord of the Rings, and I guess I get one of the questions that might come up for a game this old is like what is the value in producing expansion packs as opposed to regular updates, and so I guess for you is like what do you think is compelling about expansion packs versus regular updates?
I mean, it depends, right? So I think every expansion has different goals and objectives surrounding it. And I think when we look at like Before the Shadow, obviously that was an attempt to reinvigorate the player base and to get more to draw more people into the world, right? I think with Legacy of Morgoth, it's to satiate the endgame player while at the same time trying to put enough in uh, to keep the interest for those people who may not be at endgame. I mean, one of the things that I know I talk to you about it all the time is that we have such a massively disparate player base. There's no real group of individuals, or as we call them, cohorts, that fits into a specific group, right?
Yeah, there's
We
a little bit
have
of something for everyone
as
in Lotus.
everywhere. I mean, it's very it's evident, right? And I know that it's. I think one of the more difficult things for our players who are certainly at endgame, who are constantly looking for the next big thing, right, to engage with. And for them, there's been questions in the chat that I've seen like, are there going to be instances? Will there be a raid? The answer is yes. Like the plan is for 3-man, 2 6-mans, and a raid, right? For the expansion. So that's what we're doing. At least that's what we're planning to do for this release. But when you sit down and you start looking at the various members of the player base that we have, somebody is always going to be underserved, and there's always going to be something that is more difficult to get to. And it's why whenever we have conversations about alts and when we talk about things like allies, and why when we sit down and talk with players about the virtue system and the ally system and all the other things that are long-term objectives and development pieces, that when they go back and say, I really want to play other characters in the world, right? I want to play my alts. Those end game pieces become more and more daunting over time, which is why we do need to come up with a better solution. But it's not something that is immediately simple or immediately easy, especially when you do have all these other disparate parts of the player base that you want to try to provide as much of that same type of experience and content for them too. So I mean that's kind of the challenges that we have, right? Is figuring out how we can maintain that across such a large and diverse player base.
I think one of the things too that expansion packs are really helpful for is just eye catching. It helps keep the game awareness present and fresh for people that might have fallen off or people that haven't played the game before. They can just kind of be look at it and be like, "Oh, hey, I didn't realize this was still, you know, be still existed. I didn't realize Lord of the Rings was still a thing, or I didn't even know it was still a thing." So one of the nice benefits of an expansion pack is basically the marketing bump for it. The
Mm.
attention, the eyes that it gets on the work that we're doing. Because we don't intend on going anywhere, and it sure is nice to see people actually like being aware of what we're working on.
Yeah, yeah. Like I love doing this, right? Uh, this is a lot of fun to me, being able to interact and just kind of hang out.
Um, so do we have any? So I know we've talked a little bit about features and whatnot, and I know there's a feature that you and I have been trying to make happen for a long time that we've talked about in the past with the estate system. Um, Whether or not that's the final eventual one. So a little like backstory on that too is like that has been a feature that I've been trying to put in for probably about 4 years now, and I think we had talked a little bit earlier about like sometimes things just don't work in a given update or a given expansion pack. And it's one of those things we're thinking about things like the estate system where it's just like we look at how busy we are, how much we have on our plates, and we kind of have to make a decision about whether or not something is, appropriate to go into those. Like we had, I think when I first pitched it, um, our producer was like, "Oh, hey, that's great. I want to put it in here." And then as we start planning the expansion pack for that year, I kind of looked at everything and was like, "We don't have the room for this. We don't have the time for this. We need to like not do this for this expansion pack as much as it hurts." Has there been
And then
any feature that you've been able to implement since you've started working on Lotro again that was something that you had pitched before and either it got canceled or it just had to get delayed because of time restraints?
everything's been delayed. Come on, we know that. I mean, so the estate stuff that you're talking about, like, I think what made it even worse is that when I came back, I said, well, we should do this too. And now it's become almost a monstrosity. But it is planned. It's just, it's going to take longer than your average system
Yep.
for reasons, right? So, I mean, there's,
Ambition. That good old ambition.
it's definitely ambition. It's definitely ambitious. No, I mean, it's, there are certainly a number of things that I've always wanted to do. I mean, I guess I can say this. Uh, an aspect of something that I've always wanted to do finally made it into the game. Now, I didn't implement it. I did suggest it, um, and it's part of the servers, the legendary servers right now. The very fact that you can go out there and find randomly find a unique ring that then becomes lost. I think that is a very Tolkien-esque feature, and a very understandable aspect of the story itself, and something that is kind of compelling to the player base. And that's one of the things that I look at and say, yeah, I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to find a way to get that in. And I think we're now proving out that it's something not only possible, but uh, something that can link to the game in a more profound way.
The One
That's
Ring
that's not
actually
a
like,
hint in it.
or not the One Ring, but the ring drops for the legendary server worlds actually like feels somewhat reminiscent of the rare item system from
In Asheron's
Asheron's
Call.
Call, where we had, you had jewelry and gems and whatnot that either had a limited number of uses or actually had a physical timer on themselves before they would poof and they would get lost again for someone else to try to find.
Yep,
There's
yep, and
there's
it
something kind of like and I know player tastes are very different nowadays than they were back in those like original MMO days, but there is something like really interesting and compelling about like a system similar to that. Maybe not specifically that, but like something that speaks to just a rarity of item, basically.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting.
Well, and
It's
I
interesting.
think that there were some comments I had seen further up too with questions about things like world bosses and open landscape content, and I think kind of the legendary servers with the ring wraiths spawning and wraith spawning is really kind of a step forward for us to like think about content in those terms. You know, think about
Yeah,
how
no,
we can make that kind of open world content based around a player as opposed to something that we have to physically place.
yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that Vastin's been able to show with the work that he's done there is how possible it is. Now, look, I mean, I think we can be pretty honest that without the 64-bit servers going in, the idea behind this would have been really, really hard to uh, pull off and get done in the game world as it stood. I mean, as we've seen with some of the spawns before we put in some of the safeguards that we now have. Uh, and you and I go all the way back to AC, so we know that in the hub outside of Arwick, there used to be during major events, portal storms would start firing off all the time because there was, I think the max, if I remember, when Jot rolled in one day and looked and said, "Oh my God, we had 600 people inside of the hub, and it still didn't crash." I was like, "Yeah, but it was a slideshow." He was like, "Yeah, but it didn't crash." Like, it was
Right.
like, "Oh, like engineers have a very different. I should say, sometimes engineers have a very different view of success than we do as developers, designers, and players, right?" But
I still fond remembrances of the destruction of Arwick and then people
oh
portal
yeah,
storming themselves into craters and then dying on impact
oh yeah.
after. Uh, Oops.
But I mean, like it's. I think you're right. I think that what we've kind of proven now is this is possible, uh, and I think it's a step towards modernizing some aspects of the game. Right. I think that, and I'm not saying that this is going to be a trend that we're going to follow, but I think some of the experience that is great about the ring wraiths appearing on landscape now is that it's cool to be able to see so many people trying to get together to go and take them out. And as we kind of move forward on that server, we've got different things planned. We're not talking about them yet because we want to make sure that they're all still fresh and new and interesting when they happen. But the idea is that it's not going to be just that one trick set of nine ponies. It's more than that. There's more beyond that we're looking at of other ways that we can kind of keep things fresh and start to lean into pieces of that, because we are trying to come up with better and more modern ways to do things. And I mean, world bosses have been around for quite a while now. Um, the hard thing, and I don't know how hard this is for you, but one of the hardest things for me is because we are ambitious, because we are creatives, we always want to do more
Hmm.
than we likely have the capacity to do.
Well, there's
And
there's that, and then there's also the look at what we can do now. If we tweak it just this way, we can do something
yeah,
completely different.
we just keep tinkering with it until the point where it's like, oh, not viable anymore. But yeah, there's there's like an aspect of that where we have to be cognizant of who on the team can do a lot of that work, what other resources would need to be shifted in order to cover for any of the gaps that are left by other individuals going to work on that. So it's a question and matter of making sure that we're planning things correctly and getting things out the right way. And I think that as we start to move towards 2025, and I know it's weird to be talking about that,
No, it's not
but I
weird at
think we've
all. I'd
got
be talking about 2026 if I could.
well, I can, but I don't really want to get too much into 2026. Um, because the epic story is not yet really truly planned out for
Yeah.
2026. It is through 2025.
Well, I have my own
But
special side projects that'll keep me busy
oh, I
before then. So.
know you involved me in some of those. But yeah, no, we I think we're doing a much better job now of planning and setting expectations. And I think what we're trying to do over the like certainly over this year. This year, I tried to be very honest, certainly with Sev, at the outset of the year, that this was going to be a tougher year than we really wanted it to be. But I think that the team has really stepped up, and yeah, we're gonna miss on a few things that we really wanted to get done. But we've laid a lot of the groundwork that's going to be necessary to get us through 2025, and the planning for 2025 is already in such a better state than it was for last year, that we know that there are going to be four releases, right? We know that there are going to be We know what those are going to be, roughly when they're going to happen, and what the expected uh, inclusions inside of those will be. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And I just want to say one thing about my shirt. This is one of the original Monster Play Island shirts that we got for release of the initial game. That's
Yeah,
why I'm
so
wearing it.
everyone on the team that was with the launch of the game all got bowling shirts, and they were designed by the leads on the teams. With you look at Alan Allen's and his yours is what War Tyrant
War
Maki.
Tyrant Aquahun.
Ah,
Well, Makan.
so
I was Makan,
we
yeah,
we
which is
we
actually a
all
little bit.
have bowling shirts with lore appropriate names on them.
That was my Monster Play Island shirt. And the joke is that everybody that was working on Monster Play right before release was kind of moved off of the regular game onto the island for the last 8 to 12 weeks before the game launched to get it out the door.
So we're running a little bit long, which I'm okay with because we had those technical difficulties at the beginning. Should we talk a little bit about what the preview schedule and what the bull roar schedule is looking like for
Oh man,
Legacy of Morgoth?
let's not talk about Boror yet.
Okay.
But you can certainly talk about your preview stuff because holy crow, do you have a lot of stuff going on?
Oh, it is going to be a busy 5 more weeks, I think, for me. So starting next week, we'll kick off our landscape previews for Legacy of Morgoth, starting with the region of Amberol. And then basically every week after that, until I run out of things to preview, we'll be hitting a new region and kind of capping it off with a interiors and dungeons preview as well. So it'll be same time as this week, 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on Lotro Stream. And we'll be hitting them one week after another. And whew, I'm going to be tired after all of that streaming.
Don't worry, at some point I'll step in and start helping you out. More than likely, stepping in for Cord at least once or twice over the next month or two, just to discuss some of the other changes that are coming. Because yeah, we're heading into the Legacy of Morgoth season.
Yeah, it's exciting. Like I think with every release we do that has a major either landscape or content component to it, it's always fun and exciting to like hit those previews or hit the first bull roar and just see the player reactions, the player feedback on things. I think for me anyways, like one of the things that I've always enjoyed about doing this kind of work specifically for game development is the turnaround time on feedback, right? Like you're not closing the door for, you know, multiple years, 3 years, 4 years while you're working on a game, and then you get to see the player reaction. Like with working on a live game like Lord of the Rings, you're able to build something and then just within a few months be able to see the player reaction to it and see the interest and the response to it. So it's something that's really unique for this kind of game and this kind of experience, but it's something that's really satisfying too because you don't feel like you have to wait forever to see what people have to say.
That is the beauty of a live product.
There's the caveat too because it's just like we're still next thing and next thing and next thing, but
That's true.
it's
That is true.
it's very rewarding to see the feedback from players, like positive feedback, critical feedback, like it's all good feedback. um,
Oh
because
yeah.
that's how we grow and that's how we do better and make better is by like seeing feedback.
Oh yeah. No, there's no doubt. I I enjoy being told when we've missed as much as I enjoy being told when we've hit because
and
it
and
gives you a
it's
much better understanding of where to go next.
and it's hard to see things that you might be really proud of like get kind of dumped on a bit, but ultimately it's still just good information to have, good learnings that you can take away from it. So all right, so what do you say? Should we wrap up? Are there any other big questions that we wanted to tackle? Otherwise, I think we can call it for the day. Let's see
Yeah,
what we
I think
got
we're
here.
good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for hanging out with us for We Have a Cave Troll. we still have not pinned down our specific timing for when we want to do this. This just happened to work out well, but hopefully, starting in October, we'll have a regular time and date that we'll be doing this.
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, monthly. Would you think monthly would work, or should
Yeah,
we shoot for?
let's
I
start
don't
with
know.
monthly and see how we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, because it does take some time out of the day.
It does.
No, we're
Well,
not doing
and
daily. I saw somebody just said daily. No, we're not doing daily.
now
We're
my
definitely not
my
going to do daily.
my morning today was spent making sure my XSplit was all set up, creating the new header and footer assets for the stream, getting
Oh
everything set
yeah.
up, and I still had tech problems on my end. So,
Yep, it happens. It happens. All right.
all
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Have a good one,
Thanks, Matt.
everyone. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you all here for previews next week.
Take care.